So Jen, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. I will not be watching the chat closely. So if there is anything you need to stop me, Alan, feel free to do so. So hello, everyone. I'm here to talk about presenting your work, your user experience work, whether that be design or research, using spontaneous talks frameworks. And since I have a lot to cover, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. So before I go too far, let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Jen Blatz, and I'm a lead UX researcher at BECU, which is one of the largest credit unions in the United States. I'm also one of the co-founders of UX Research and Strategy, which is an online meetup group. And if you're interested in connecting with me or the group, feel free to find us on LinkedIn. And one more thing, you may have noticed that I like to have pictures of dogs in my presentation. So there's going to be a lot of dogs coming up. So hope you like doggos like I do. So let's talk about stories. Yeah, and we know that people love stories. They remember details of a compelling story. Maybe it pulls at their heartstrings, or maybe it motivates them to take action on something. I think stories pack a pretty powerful punch. And we're told time and time again that we should be sharing our user experience work through stories. You can tell them maybe what you observed in user research. You can show a video clip of a participant struggling to use your prototype. Or you can include a compelling quote from some of that research. And I think that those pack a pretty powerful punch. You can sometimes let the research tell your story. But we're here to talk about spontaneous talks frameworks. And I would say these are a little different than your traditional fairy tale that has an arc of a story structure. The things I'm going to talk about today, they don't have a rising action or a hero or a resolution necessarily. I mean, I would go as far as to say they're not even really stories at all in the traditional sense. So spontaneous talks frameworks, I know that's a mouthful, are less about tall tales and more about organizing your thoughts quickly using a framework. I mean, who doesn't love a good framework? And who doesn't love a shortcut to help them get organized so they can jump right in and start sharing right away? And who doesn't love a way to reduce anxiety when you have to talk to other people? I know I love all of those things. And this is what spontaneous talks frameworks do for you. They help you organize your thoughts so you can present your UX designs or your research or your project, maybe a project you're working on. And they can also be used to help you answer questions on the spot. And I think that they can be a fabulous crutch when you need to speak on a topic that you didn't have the opportunity to prepare in advance. So I hope you're ready for some on your feet thinking, because there is no turning back now. Now, I'm going to be throwing a lot of abbreviations at you today, but don't feel like you need to remember them all. I will have a summary slide here at the end that you could take a screenshot of, and it'll help you remember the frameworks we're going to talk about. But I want to talk about the value of spontaneous talk frameworks and what I want you to get from the talk today. I want you to know about these frameworks so that you can know how to answer because you organize your thoughts. And then you can feel a little bit more confident because you organize your thoughts. And then you can just do it. Just speak with a little bit less anxiety because you organized your thoughts. So I hope some of you here are familiar with the concept of chunking. We don't really have an emoji, but hopefully some of you have heard of this idea. And that is a way to organize things in small pieces to help you comprehend larger pieces of information. So a classic example of this is the phone number. It's often broken down into smaller segments of numbers to help you write it down and to remember what it is. Like this number you see here, this is the number I would call from a phone in the United States to call the King of England. Well, He's not quite the king yet, but he will be. Can you believe his phone number is actually published online? So breaking up this phone number like this makes it easier to remember. And that's what spontaneous talks frameworks do as well. They help you break your information into smaller pieces, smaller consumable chunks to help you organize them better and to remember them better. So I first heard about this when I was watching a YouTube video from Matt Abrahams. And Matt is a lecturer at Stanford Grad School, and he's a speaker who teaches others how to be better public speakers. And I was watching him one night, and this is the video, actually. If you're interested, I highly recommend it. It's pretty good. And he was talking about spontaneous talks frameworks. And I was like, ooh, this is cool. And after seeing his talk, I got really inspired. But back to dogs for a second. I want to switch gears for a second and talk about fear. Now, I don't know about you, but there are times when I'm put on the spot, kind of like a deer in headlights. I freeze when I have a tricky question, or maybe I don't know the answer. I kind of freeze. I have an internal panic, freak out a little bit. And instead of having a very organized, eloquent answer, I just start blurting out a bunch of stuff that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. I know this has happened to me like in a job interview. Can anybody else have that kind of feel? Yeah, I'm suspecting some of you have been in the same situation. But now that I know about spontaneous talks frameworks, I can use these thought organization techniques to help me answer things on the spot and to present my UX work. So here's kind of what the process looks like. You're presented with a topic or a question. You take a second to think about the frameworks that we're going to go through today. You pick a framework that you think might apply to be a good way to answer or to present your work. And then you organize your thoughts around that framework. And it helps you prevent blurting out a bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense. Okay, so now that we know where it came from, where Jen learned about it, let's jump right into some different spontaneous talks frameworks and how you can apply them to your work. So the first one I'm going to talk about is what, so what, now what. Now this framework was actually developed in the 1970s, and it's simply answering these three questions. First, what? What happened? What is going to happen? Then you say so, you answer so what? And this is where you talk about the value, like why is it important or what lessons we might learn. Who cares? The so what. And then finally, now what? And that's where you talk about what you're going to do next or what maybe you should do moving forward. What? So what? Now what? So I think that this framework is really great for sharing UX work because it requires you to give a little bit of context surrounding your work. That's the what. So I'm going to, when I'm walking through some examples today, I'm going to do a little, I'm going to talk about a framework, then I'm going to switch to presenting my work mode, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I apply that framework. So I want to switch personalities, I guess, in a sense. So when I'm presenting my UX work, as I'm going through the example, I'm going to go whoop, so that you know that I am changing into presentation mode, okay? So let's say I am going to present some wireframes that I designed and I researched to my client. And so when I do that, which is going to be in just a second, I'm going to change from presenting at Convey UX to Jen presenting UX work. All right, so let's walk through an example. I'm going to share some designs with you today and walk you through the iterations that we're going to be making based on what we learned. So this design is helping your employees find the most important things on your company's human resources website. Your employees want to find things like their paycheck history, finding a new career opportunity within the company, and information about their health benefits. This is an American company, health benefits through, obviously, an employer. So the research I conducted surfaced that these are the most important, the most critical aspects of your human resources website that people want information on. Now, what we're going to do next is we want to learn how they want to get to the information that they need. Are they going to use the search bar at the top of the page? Are they going to use those navigation elements at the top of the page? Or are they going to click into the boxes here within the page to start their information journey? So we're going to be conducting testing on these wireframes to help us understand how your employees are going to navigate through the website. So as you can see, I told them what the page was designed to do, to help people look for HR-related topics. Then I said why these topics are important. And that's because through research, we learned that these are the topics that are most sought after by the employees. And then we talked about what we're going to do next, which is test these designs to see how people were going to be navigating the page. So that's the framework. What? So what? Now what? So I have a pro tip. I would say, when in doubt, go with this framework. It's easy to remember. It covers a lot of important ground. So if you forget the frameworks I'm going to go through today, this is an easy one to remember. What? So what? Now what? Okay, the next one I want to go through is called OSB. And OSB stands for opportunity. Sometimes it's known as problem. So opportunity, solution, benefit. So similar to the previous framework, OSB provides a little bit of structure and context to your presenting the work. Then you talk about the solution. And then finally, you talk about how this benefits the user, or maybe how it benefits the business. So the previous example, the what, so what, now what, talked about what you're going to do next. Well, this one, OSB, is a great way to share work where it is right now. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do next necessarily. So this is a good status quo, here we are kind of framework. So let's go through another example. Let's pretend I'm presenting a dashboard design to my stakeholders. This dashboard is for technology account managers to get an overview of their servers and their storage environment. Before this design, information was scattered all over the place, and users had to jump from place to place to gather the critical information that they needed. This consolidated dashboard design surfaces all that important information in one place. And the benefit to our users is they no longer have to navigate all over the place to get the information that they need. Now they can get that high-level understanding all in one place. So, see what I did there? I started with what the design was trying to fix. Information scattered all over the place. That's the opportunity or the problem I was trying to solve. Then I told what the design solution was, and that is how this dashboard view brings that important information into one place. And then I wrapped up by telling my stakeholders what the benefit was of this dashboard view. And that is providing that kind of one-stop shop. So again, this one is presenting work as it is right now. Pretty straightforward, huh? All right. Next framework, STAR. Anybody here? Can't see you raising your hands, but I'm guessing that some of you have heard the STAR framework and maybe heard of like as a recommendation to use in a job interview, like present your answer using this STAR framework. So let's break it down a little bit. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So situation, is that context, that background information. Just enough for them to understand what's going on. You don't have to go on and on with these frameworks. Keep it brief and concise. T is the task, and that is what needs to be done. You tell them what needs to be done and why it needs to be addressed. Action is what you did, maybe how you did it. You could talk about what tools you used, maybe, or what approaches you took to solve that problem. And then finally, R is the results. And that's simply explaining what happened in the end. You can talk about, if it's a job interview, talk about your accomplishments or success. Again, the result, what happened in the end. So similar to the other framework, STAR is providing a little bit of context, talk about what you did, what action you took on it, and what happened in the end, like maybe what you learned, or again, the result. So let's walk through an example showing how to do the STAR framework. So I'm going to show you a before and an after design. So let's pretend I'm sharing these designs with my team. I've done a bit of research, I've updated the designs, and I'm going to walk them through that. So I'm going to first go through the previous design, and then I'm going to talk about how I updated the interface after conducting research. All right. So the original design that we started with had a few opportunities for improvement. And I learned about these through my research with users. So for example, the users expected these cards to be interactive, meaning they expected to be able to click on them and drill down deeper into each one of these products. So these are kind of pieces of a whole. These are products within a suite. Think about like Adobe, which has Illustrator and XD and Photoshop. Those are all different products within a suite. And that's what this is too. So they expected to be able to click into each box to get more information. And some users even felt like they weren't really, this didn't really feel like pieces of a whole. Some of the logos felt like they were consistent. Some of them felt like they weren't really part. So the design didn't feel very cohesive. And then finally, they said the descriptions of these products were just full of buzzwords and marketing speak, and just wasn't really helpful for them to understand what these products even were. So based on this research, the design opportunity that I took to improve these cards were a couple of things. First, now users can click on these cards to dig deeper into what these products do. And I created some icons that have very similar look and feel, similar weights and colors, so they feel like they're pieces of a larger whole, like a bigger suite. And then I worked with a content strategist to write some words that make sense to human beings. Got rid of the buzzwords and all that extra stuff so that it clearly explained what this product did. So the result is we met those users' needs and expectations of providing a package of a suite of like individual products that feel like a whole thing, but makes sense and can help somebody find more information about each of these products. So again, I applied the STAR framework and used the this framework to like situation, task, action, and result. The situation was the flaws in the design. The task was the user research to find out areas of improvement. The actions I took were based on that user research and made improvements to the interface by using that data from the interviews and the research and updating it. And then finally, the results were better, more cohesive designs. So this next one I want to talk about, I know we're bouncing through a lot. That's the point. We're going to learn a lot about different frameworks. So this next one is PREP, and this stands for point, reason, example, point. So this nice little framework, you start with stating your point. And that's basically just a matter of fact, here's my point of view. Then you give a reason, maybe one, maybe two, a reason behind why that's your point. And then the next is you provide some evidence or examples as to why that is your point, backing it up, giving your point a good, strong foundation. And then you conclude by stating your point again, just in case anybody forgot what your point was in the first place. So I think that this is a great approach to presenting UX research. So let me walk through an example of that. And I'm going to show a design of a wireframe based on, talk about some research that I did for this design. Based on in-depth user interviews I conducted with the various user groups in the security analyst department, I'm going to share a design recommendation with you that will set up our analysts for easily reviewing security tickets. So focus on this box here on the left. It surfaces that critical information that an analyst needs to know about an incident. So after talking to people who need to monitor security in situations like Beth in the private investing branch, I learned what's really important for Beth to have front and center. So first, she wants to see the severity of the incident. And you can see that the top line, first line, severity number 3. How bad is this incident? Beth also wants the ability to follow or keep track of an incident. And she can do that by hitting the star. Because sometimes incidents don't go away in just a matter of hours. They can last days or weeks. And then finally, based on feedback from other users and Beth, I learned that this incident ticket, the viewing of this, does present the critical information that they need to understand what's going on in the security incident. So this is what I love about the PrEP framework. It's very straightforward. Here's what's important. Here's the reason why it's important. Here's an example that illustrates why it's important. And wrapping it up with a pretty bow, here's my point again, one more time, in case you forgot. All right, the next framework I want to talk about is BLUF. This one actually has its roots in the American military. So BLUF stands for bottom line up front. And the idea is simple. You state the most important information first. And this is especially important in a military situation where life and death could rely on delivering a message quickly. So, look, at wartime, there's not a lot of time to be farting around with a lot of details. You have to state the most important thing first. And then you can provide some other supporting details for that. It's similar to the lead in journalism. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with what the lead is, but the lead is, especially in newspaper writing, the lead is that first paragraph or two, which states the most important information right at the beginning of the story. And the lead is written there for a couple of reasons. First of all, not a lot of people, not everybody has time to read the whole story, so give them the most important information first. And second, there is a functional reason also, because a newspaper has a very limited amount of space. It's a physical paper. And if a story runs too long, they will cut it from the bottom. So if you have the most important information up first, it's easier to cut from the bottom. And that's the idea of BLUF, bottom line up front. So you can use this framework when you're presenting your work by including an executive summary at the beginning of sharing your work. I have struggled with this in the past where I didn't used to do my executive summary. I used to talk about the method and the approaches, but now I'm much more of a fan of presenting the most important thing first and then providing supporting details like the methods and the recommendations and the additional findings after you hook them with the really important stuff. So let's pretend I'm sharing some results of a card sort, and I'm sharing my final recommendations for a restaurant menu structure. So this is what I would say. Here's the final recommendation for the way the Greek Athena grill menu should be structured. Grilled vegetables are found under vegetables. Hummus can be categorized as a side, but hummus can also be found, based on this card sort, in sauces and toppings. So these findings are based on card sorts that I conducted with actual users of this menu, and they shared with me where they expected to find these menu items. So in this example, I showed the final result. Ta-da! Here's the menu structure. Then I gave them a few nuggets of important information that I found, some categories and where things should be found, and then I told them about the research method that I used, which was a card sort. So basically, bluff means don't start with the fluff. So I want to switch gears for a second and talk about a couple of attention grabbers and a few more frameworks. And I would say some of the frameworks I'm going to go through, maybe a little less about presenting your work and maybe a little bit more about how to answer questions or to break some bad news. So let's dive in to some attention grabbing techniques. So here's a couple of my favorites. I'm thinking some of you may have seen this quote before. The design is not what it looks like and feels like. The design is how it works. Guessing some of you may have seen this. This is a very, very famous Steve Jobs quote that a lot of UX designers reference so that they can talk about how the experience is rather than just the visual design of something. So one way that you can grab somebody's attention is to use a very compelling quote like this and share like something that's interesting or something a famous person said and really use that quote to capture their attention, to encompass what you want to say, and sets the tone for the rest of what you're going to share. Or how about a shocking statistic? There are over 500 hours of content loaded to YouTube every minute. Oof. If that's not a lot of video content, I don't know what is. That is a lot. So you could use shock tactics like this to grab your audience attention as well. You can use stats, photos, images, and these are a great way to capture their attention and set the tone for the rest of your presentation. Okay, let's go back to some frameworks now. I want to talk about ADD. Answer, detail, describe, value. Now this is less about presenting your work and more about answering questions on the spot. So A is answer, obviously. But answer the questions concisely. Squeeze that answer into a few choice words. Keep it simple and keep it short. D is to provide details. You can do this through an example. You can illustrate it with a little bit more detail. It's just enough context to say a little bit more than the answer. Try to paint a picture in their mind. And the second D is for describe value. And this is where you show the real impact of your answer. So I like this on your toes technique of answering questions because you do more than just answer it like with a yes or no, but you illustrate it with an example and then you wrap it up by really describing the value. So let me illustrate the ADD framework through an example. Let's say I'm presenting a design that I created on mobile and they asked, is this the right level of detail on a mobile device for this user? Whoop. Yes, this design does provide the right level of detail on a mobile view. In our research, I heard from Robert, who's a systems administrator. And when he's at home, he's on his mobile, just like the rest of us. And one evening, he got pinged to review the permissions for Tabitha. So as an administrator, he wants to be able to do this on his mobile phone, not have to go over here and open his computer. And so, yes, after talking with Robert and understanding the level of detail he needs to make a decision, to grant permissions, this is the right view. So let me tell you a little bit about the value shown here on mobile. An admin like Robert, again, this is the critical information he needs about Tabitha to take action, to give her or deny permissions without having to hop over to a computer. He can do it right here on his mobile phone. So for this example, I answered the question. Yes, I learned from working with Robert, talking with him, that this is the right level of detail for a user to make a decision and take action on a mobile device. And then I wrapped it up by showing the value, and that is, again, that it's the right level of detail. So I hope that you can see how the ADD, or answer, detail, describe, value, how this framework is another way to answer questions, but you also go a little bit further and support that answer with an example and then describe the value or the impact of the decision that you made. So I want to talk about this framework called PPO, and this is philosophy, process, outcome. And I like this framework as a great way to answer job interview questions, especially those really tough ones where you want the person that you're talking to understand a little bit about your beliefs or your point of view before you go into the story. So what you're doing with this framework is you're sharing your philosophy or your level setting on your stance a little bit. So you share your point of view, why you feel a certain way. Then you talk about how you accomplished something or how you approached a scenario, how you did it. That's the process. And then you wrap up by telling them the outcome or the result. So let me illustrate the PPP, spontaneous talk framework, through an example. Let's say you're in a job interview. Like this dog here. He clearly is in a job interview, right? So let's say the hiring manager or somebody asks you this question. Tell me about a time that you disagreed with a coworker. Don't you just love this question? I'm not a big fan, but it gets asked. So, I mean, that's the funny thing, right? Everybody always gets along with all of their coworkers, don't they? No. But, okay, so here is my answer to that question using the PPO framework. Whoop. My philosophy is to openly communicate and try to understand the root cause or the motivation behind our differing views. So I had this UI designer I was working with on my team who was upset that I did not create as many designs as he did. And he thought that I was doing less work than he was. And I could kind of sense some tension when we met on a weekly basis to talk about what we were working on. And I asked him, he seems upset about something, what's going on? And he said, you're not carrying your weight in work. He said, you're not creating as many pages as I am. This is what a UI's designer's job is. There's the difference. He was more of a UI designer, mocking up pages. I was more of a UX designer with a heavy focus on research. And once we kind of discovered that we had differing job roles and differing duties, then we could get along a little bit better because I wasn't expected to churn out as many UI designs as he was. I was focusing a lot of my efforts on actually conducting research. And once he found out that I was doing research, he actually valued that, because if he had questions about designs or actions or behaviors, he could ask me to go conduct the research and I could go do that to help inform his designs. So let me review what I did there. I started with my point of view before jumping into the story. That way the person listening, they have a little bit of framing and they know what I'm going to focus on. It's also a way to get the audience or the person interviewing you to understand where you're coming from. And maybe you can even get them to align on your philosophy a little bit. And then I talked about the problem and my actions that I took to address this and what I did about it. And finally, I wrapped up with the outcome. So this nice little framework is great when you want to potentially align on a point of view first before you dive into the story. So let's go through the last framework for today. Now, not all scenarios that you're going to talk about are going to be rosy, happy endings, or positive. So let's talk about a spontaneous talk framework that you can use when you have to deliver negative or bad news. I have to share a regrettable situation. So that is RRR. Regret, reason, repair. I kind of think of this as crisis communication, where PR for a celebrity or a company has to talk about like what went wrong and address like the issue publicly. So you can use the RRR framework when you want to talk about maybe a feature that failed in testing. It's part of the reason why we do usability tests, right? We want to make sure our designs actually work for the user. But you know what? Sometimes they don't. So we need a framework to help break some bad news. So here's my example. Unfortunately, the new homepage caused a little bit of confusion. Not a lot of people are clicking on that continue for free button in the top right of the page. And I think that's because they're just scrolling right down the page and they're missing that button at the top. So my recommendation is to move that button down below the 3 boxes and above the free trial banner so that they can see the button there. Also, we should change that button to our call to action orange so it stands out on the page more. See, that wasn't so bad. Sure, I had to break some bad news, but I explained my theory using the RRR framework. First, I told them I was regretful. I acknowledged the problem, that people were not clicking on that button at the top right. Then I told them why I think it's a problem. It's because they're scrolling right on by it. And then I wrapped up with the solution, which was to move the button down and to change it to orange so that it stands out on the page more and aligns with our styles. So yeah, you can even use spontaneous talks frameworks when you have to squirm out of a negative situation and give some bad news. Whew. Okay, I know I went through a lot. PPP, OSB, blah, blah. I get it. The last thing you want to do when you're put on the spot is try to remember some silly abbreviations. But these are less about remembering catchy abbreviations and they're more about reducing your anxiety. And so they're there to kind of help you structure your thoughts and organize your thoughts in a way. But I'm going to be honest, I think it's going to take some practice. But anything worth getting good at takes a bit of practice, right? Try it out a few times to get comfortable with these approaches. Determine what frameworks you like to work with the best, and it's going to be a lot easier to actually do it on the spot. So I recommend when you need to do some presentations or when you need to do something, use some of these, pick a framework and structure your presentation or your answer around that. Be brief, but get some practice. And it's okay to write them down until you get more familiar and comfortable with them to where you can give them on the spot. So like I said, this is the slide that you might want to take a screenshot of. These are all the spontaneous talk frameworks that we went through today. I'm not going to go through them all again. Take your screenshot here. Wow, we actually did go through quite a few today, didn't we? Again, I know it's a lot. If you find out you're starting to panic, which is not what we're trying to do here, is if you're starting to panic and you can't recall which one to do, take my advice and go with the what, so what, now what spontaneous talk framework. It's really simple to remember. It's really versatile, and it covers like all the important bits that you need to express. What, so what, now what. And so as for today's talk, now what? Well, I'm going to wrap it up with a compelling quote. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. And so my hope for you today is that I gave you some tools to get to that other side of fear. Again, these spontaneous talk frameworks can help you overcome some of that fear and anxiety by organizing your thoughts and articulating a well-crafted answer. So go out there and get to the other side of fear. Thank you very much.
Okay, love it, Jen. Thank you so much. And I see what you did there. You used one of your techniques, the compelling quote, to close your talk. So good trick there. So, and kind of facetiously, I want to ask, do you have any 5-step frameworks? Because I was like, we're going for 3. Now there are 4.
Most of the ones 3. I think 5 gets a little much. You can embed framework within a framework. I have done that, but
Okay.
try to keep it simple here, Alan. So let's not go crazy and go to 5. Let's
I'm reminded of, I think there are good reasons not to have 5. I'm reminded of the Onion article about when men's razors were going from 2 blades to 3 blades to 4 blades to 5, and it got ridiculous. So, so anyway, let's look at the audience questions. I love this one. I'm going to go to Jamie's first because I think it's short and sweet. I know it depends is always in effect, but can you give a rule of thumb on the ideal length of time for these presentations?
That about how much you should say in a framework, I think is what that like about how
Either
many minutes.
How much you should say, or the duration, how many minutes you should take for the communication?
Sure, that's a good question, Jamie. Thank you for that. I think brevity is something to strive for here, and that keeps it organized and clean. So depending on, obviously, if you have a large presentation, the whole presentation is going to be, several minutes. But try to keep it brief. 1 to 2 sentences is what I say when you're using these frameworks. That way it doesn't get out of control and you don't start to ramble. So practicing like really just answering the question or addressing, OSB. Here's the opportunity. Here's the solution. Here is the benefit. You can do that in 3 sentences total. And so it's as much as like maybe not doing a whole presentation of a big project, but trying to keep it brief and organized and addressing the key points that you want to address in your statements. So the shorter the better is what I would say.
Okay, that's a more concise answer than it depends. So good,
yes.
Thank you.
And longer, my answer was longer than a framework, as you can see.
Right. So Young Ming asks, and this question is a little bit big and broad, probably broader than we have time available, but are there any pros and cons of each method? Could you please give us examples of which methods work best for certain situations? And I'll sort of elaborate myself. And as you presented the frameworks, I had a good gut feel for when they are appropriate. And you added some details like RRR when you're breaking bad news, or bluff to share very important information. And I think I would need to go back and think about them a little bit more to make those distinctions of which one is appropriate when. I would also encourage you to write a book in which you provide more detail about each. But do you have any in 30 seconds or less? Any response to Young Ming?
Sure, yeah. So I would say think about what you're really trying to share and accomplish. Like the what, so what, now what framework. The last phrase there, now what, you're going to be talking about the future, what your next steps are. So if you don't know what your next steps are, that's not an appropriate framework for you. Where if you're only reporting like, hey, here is my design today, OSB, opportunity, problem I was trying to solve, solution, the benefit to the user, done. Here's where we stand today. You're not talking about the future necessarily yet. So think about what information you're trying to share, what is really important for your audience to know what you're presenting. And I think that might help direct which framework you want to apply to that answer.
Okay, so with that, we should close the session. But Jen, thank you so much for such a informative, mind-expanding, idea-generating session. I'm grateful. I think the audience is grateful from what I see. And so this concludes Jen's sessions. But Jen, you obviously have several ways that the audience can contact you. And that's all for now. Our next set of sessions will start at the half hour, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Convey UX.
Great.
Take care, all.
Thanks, Alan. Bye.
Hey, thanks, Jen.